Thank you for all the love that we've been getting back from you. Today is day 4, and today is a special day. We have 2 presenters. We have Joe Lawrence. Say hi, Joe.
Hello, everyone.
And Richard Hammer.
Good morning, everyone.
So Richard is not technically part of the Agile 11, but he's very close to us. So Richard and I met about 3 years ago. I'm not going to tell the full story. It involves some swearing. But Richard and I met about 3 years ago. He was working, he's had his consultancy for many years. It's called the Hollows Group, and he's been at the forefront of organizational agility and organizational development in this country. We met for a client, and as soon as we met, we thought that what we were doing with the Agile 11 and his skill set was very complementary. So Richard has become, I call him the spiritual guru of the Agile 11. So he's become the spiritual guru of the Agile 11 since then. And it's, you'll see, it's a pleasure to hear him. I'm sure with him and Joe, they put a beautiful webinar about staying connected. I was thinking this morning that, Joe, you probably are the youngest in the Agile 11. Is that right? You're the youngest? Yeah?
Right.
Yeah. And Richard, I wouldn't say you're the oldest because you're not, but you're probably the most experienced, yeah?
Well, I'm old enough.
So I was wondering.
I want to use this wise.
I was going older by the day with kids at home, I can tell you what.
Yeah, they're wiser probably. So I was thinking how this staying connected, you're going to play because, there's a generational gap here between Joe and Richard. And I think some of the ways that Joe, is used to get connected is probably very different to the ways Richard, used to get connected. So I'm very curious about how they're going to play that generational gap as well today. So I hope you all enjoy. I'll pass it on to Martine as always. She's going to tell us about all the logistics and enjoy the webinar today.
Thank you. So just a couple of things you'll see at your side of the webinar. You've got 2 functions down the bottom. One is Q&A. If you have any questions that you'd like answered today, please pop them in there. Everybody in the webinar can see your questions, and we'll answer those as they come through. You've also got a chat, which we can see some of that happening on the side, and B has written a comment. Let's just say that Richard is part of the team because he really is. So if you want to chat with us, you can. The default is to the panelists. It will just come to the 5 of us. You can drop down to all panelists and attendees, and others can see your comments. So we'll call out things there if we would like to hear from you as well. So say anything you would like to. We are recording the webinar. I did hit record a second late today, so sorry about that. And we will share the slides with you as well after the webinar. Now it's all yours. Oh, hang on. No, I've got one more thing to say.
Sure.
Let's go to the next slide. So this is us today staying connected with Joe and Richard, and tomorrow we'll see Eduardo come through with the leading virtually. So over to Joe and Richard.
Thank you, Eduardo and Martine. So yes, I'm Joe from the Agile 11. And we've got Richard here with us as well, who we did a bit of intro then. I'll be almost your chaperone from the Agile 11 today and guide you through the slides, give some stories, and then we'll lean on Richard's extensive knowledge in psychology and team building. So yeah, we're really looking forward to spending this time with you today. How are you today, Richard? How's your working from home situation? It's good?
Yeah, look, it's the first day that all kids are home today. So put it this way, I got up about 6:30 and was in the shower at 7. And at about 7:05, my youngest came in telling me that my oldest son wanted to punch him in the head. So I've already had to deal with 2 kids fighting over the remote control at 7. So we're off to a good start.
That's it.
How are you? What's up for you?
Very good, very good. My girlfriend, who's on the call, has invaded my home office. So all these challenges that are coming up. No, I'm very good, very good.
Right.
So the 3 key ideas that we're going to explore today, all very timely and important for, as Richard mentioned, it's the first day that we'll all be in lockdown essentially. So we've got how to maintain and strengthen our virtual working relationships. We've got how to stay connected socially as a remote team. and also some concrete tools and processes and practices that you can take away with you for emotional connection, and use those to take care of yourself and the other people that are in your team. So let's get into it.
So I might just say, Joe, before we start, that we've got a bunch of stuff we want to go through, and we've got about 15 minutes because we want to have time at the end for Q&A. So you might feel that we're going through a little faster, but just know we've got the slides and the video coming back to you.
Absolutely. And reach out if you want to chat afterwards at all. So virtual working relationships, we wanted to touch on the fact that this is all really about teams, and a team is a group of people that trust each other and have a relationship with one another. And you can see on the right there that we've got the ultimate working from home policies that we trust you circled in red. So if you can really lean on that and lean into that trust that you have for your team members, make sure that you're committing to being available to them and communicating with them. And we really see this as almost a beautiful constraint in a way. And yes, we are all at home, but we can actually use this opportunity to not just maintain our relationships with one another, but strengthen them in a different context. So how do we maintain our trust as a team? So as I mentioned, it's through that regular connection and communication with each other, and showing a genuine care. So this is really a time where we have to make sure that we're checking in on each other, taking an interest. And the key point here is that when we're thinking about trust, there's two ways this often works. There's the trust built over the long term where you'll meet someone, the small interactions that add up, delivering work together, and then you reach a place of trust. But in a virtual context, we have to flip that almost and start from a place of trust, and trust that Richard's not at home watching Netflix. He's there getting his work done. So Richard, if you could chat to us about the 3 practices of psychological safety, because I think that's a key element here.
Yeah, so before we get into that, I'd just like to say that what is trust really? Like, we use the word trust a lot, but basically it's 5 things. 1, it's reliability. You know, you do what you say you're going to do. It's openness. You know, it's a sense that I can give feedback and receive back, and that'll be okay. The sense of congruence that I do what I say and I say what I do, and I say what I mean to each other. Commonality. You know, we have shared values, or we think similarly to each other, and ultimately acceptance. I can be myself, and that will be okay. So, you know, several years ago, Google did a study looking at high-performing teams. This is Project Aristotle, and we'll put a link with the slides after this. But Project Aristotle looked at what is it that makes up a high-performing team that works remotely. And they identified one key thing that made all the difference, and it's called psychological safety. And basically, that's a person being able to be themselves without fear of negative consequence. And how do we do that? Well, there are 3 things that happen. First, we need to make sure that everybody in the team has equal airtime. Every voice is heard, either over the course of a meeting or a day or a week. And if somebody's voice isn't being heard, we invite them in to speak. Second, we're deeply curious about each other and really what makes each other tick. And that's about trying to understand where we have commonality and where we have shared beliefs. And third, this practice of emotional risk-taking or relational risk-taking. We have to be vulnerable. There's this notion here of trust, starting from a place of trust and knowing that you'll be okay, rather than building trust over time.
Thank you, Richard. And I really love that last point as well, that emotional risk-taking is that reaching out to someone. You know, you might think that, oh, we just need to deliver the work, but take that opportunity to reach out to someone and ask how they are. So we also wanted to talk about the power of positive relationships and the fact that we all know this, all know how to do this really well, and we've done it many times throughout our lives. So Richard's going to take the lead on this slide.
Yeah, so the premise here being based on positive psychology is that we all know how to have great relationships with each other. So what I'd like you to do, and I'm going to ask Joe this question, is can you just take a moment, Joe, to think about your strongest relationship or relationships where you have deep trust, and tell me 2 or 3 things that you do to maintain those relationships with other people.
Absolutely. There's no pressure because my girlfriend's on the line. But we see each other every day, probably, listen to each other's problems without judgment, always there for each other, those tough things.
So listening, being with each other each day, listening to each other's challenge and helping problem solved, and no judgment. So how could you translate that, or how are you translating those three factors into your working relationships at Agile 11?
Yes. Yeah, creating that space to reach out to people and listen. Should probably start doing that more as of today, reaching out to the likes of Eduardo, Bia, and Martine and asking how they are, checking in before meetings, all those good things.
Yeah. Because the real tip here is that just to stay open to this idea that your very next conversation with somebody might be your best conversation for the day. And even if you're, 3 video conferences in, just knowing that that next conversation might be the most amazing one you've had and staying open to that possibility.
Absolutely. So I might get you to talk us through this model that we've got here on the left as well, Richard.
Yeah, so I've also noticed that KO, thanks KO for your message, has put in how do we cater for both introverts and extroverts online. Well, I'm an extrovert, so my job is to really be curious about other people and listen in and really ask people's questions about questions about what's happening for them. If I'm introverted and if I know I'm introverted, my job is to be relationally vulnerable and put myself out there more. Practically when we're working online, we have to kind of stretch our edges about what we're most comfortable with to see how else we can be with each other. So, Kay, I hope that answered your question. The other thing I want to talk about is, even though this session is really about staying connected as a team, it's not about abandoning the tasks. So this model here we see in front of us is pretty simple, but it really speaks to the importance of balancing both relationships with tasks. If we don't think about the task, and if we don't think about people, like we're in essence go on holidays, then remotely a team will get pretty dysfunctional because people aren't staying connected with each other. But if we focus only on the tasks as the results, but not on the relationship, we might be productive, but we'll feel disconnected. People will feel like they're working in isolation or alone, a maverick or a sole person, not really part of the team. Conversely, if we focus only on people and relationships and not on the task, then we might as well be a friendship group. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not necessarily the purpose of work. But if we focus on both, we have a chance to become a high-performing remote team. Really focus on results and really focus on relationships. And at Agile 11, we've found that there's 4 things that help us stay in that top right bucket there. The first of the 4 is this idea of fostering a shared identity, knowing who we are together. So, at Agile 11, our purpose together is revolutionising the way organisations and people think about and experience work. We've got a set of values, staying curious, being awesome to each other. We've got some DNA, we're real people. So it's just having shared identity. And I know that Martine and Bea have already spoken about this in previous sessions. 2, staying connected across all team members and at scale. That might be the daily check-in with each other so we know what's happening. Virtual bumping places. It's this idea of how do we take the idea of a coffee shop or the tea room and put it virtually. So we have what we call virtual lunch Wednesdays. So Wednesday, at 12 noon, we always put the video on and we might be making lunch or eating lunch, but this is just a chance we're all connected with each other. Or, the random calls at the end of the day where we just check in with another team member to see what they're up to. And the final thing is about meaningful or shared work together. This webinar series has come together in the last week, and I tell you what, it's shared work that's really galvanized us and Agile 11 really connecting with each other.
Thank you, Richard. So as we move on from our first key point that we're exploring, I think, the 2 most important things to take away is 1, take some action and reach out to one of your team members, even just one. If everybody on this webinar reaches out to one person, that can make a big difference in these, times they're unprecedented, can be a bit stressful. And then as we go through as well, also think about this balance of delivering the work that we need to and focusing on the tasks, the action, the results, and the people as well. There's always an element in both.
Can we answer a question that's come in as well at this point about how do we build and maintain these relationships with team members who may work at different times of the day? So some are early morning, some are night owls. How do we manage that?
Well, I might start. We're going to talk about this a little bit further on in this webinar, but it's agreeing as a team when is a time when we know all of us are going to be working. So, for example, that might be we know that we're going to be working. Everyone's working between 12 and 2. So that we we might be working remotely or alone at other points in time, but between 12 and 2, we're always going to be together, and I can reach out to any member of the team and know they're going to be available. So it's finding just a time of overlap where we all know we're going to be working.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And thanks for that question, Jordana.
Awesome. Alrighty, let's get into social connection as a remote team. So as we all know, when we are physically co-located, those social interactions, they happen really nicely and unfold naturally, where you'll bump into someone for a coffee, or someone comes new to the team and you'll go out for lunch. Most of the time, leaders don't have to worry about that thing. You know, someone will set up a Friday night drinks and everyone will go hang out. But in a remote context, so where we find ourselves now, we have to be really intentional and proactive about creating multiple conversation points for this to happen. So where it would unfold naturally in a physical context, now we have to really think about how can we proactively and intentionally create those spaces for one another.
Because we need to recognise as we go through this, Joe, that the routines of everyday work, we take a bunch of those things for granted. And those routines of everyday work aren't there anymore. So we need to recreate them and reimagine them in new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to go through a few examples, tell a few stories, but there's kind of two considerations here when we're talking about staying socially connected. There's our formal connections. These are more structured conversations that you might find embedded in your operating rhythm that you're checking in on every day. So it's mainly focused around the work. And then there is the informal conversations, such as, say, a water cooler conversation, or that free-flowing communication that's just random. You're talking about, you know, sharing family photos, posting funny pictures, things like that. So we'll get into a few examples on the next couple of slides. So we'll start with maintaining formal connections. So there's a few examples there down the left-hand side. Check-ins, one-on-one, check-ins as a team. So those things that you might have every Monday morning to check in, chat about the work. Daily team huddles. Richard, you had a good story about structured team time.
Yeah, so I just shared a little bit before that we know that as a team, we have shared working time. I'm currently embedded in a client's team, and they have what they call Momentum Thursdays. So it's a team that's focused on some business change, and every Thursday they know they're working together, and they can guarantee that between 10 and 12, they're always going to be online connected with each other. You know, that one-on-one time, we at Agile 11 have a range of things like a developmental buddy, where each person within the team has someone else they talk to during the week, plus a growth coach, which is more of our more formal developmental processes around how we become better practitioners. And we've got a range of one-on-one scheduled stuff and team stuff around that way.
Absolutely. And the one I'm going to touch on next, and that's the photo that you can see on your right, which we have mentioned throughout the series. So if you've been attending every single webinar, you will have a bit of knowledge about this. But the reason that I mention it again now is I think this is the easiest one for you to take away from today and get started that will give you the most best outcomes. So it's a digital stand-up and a wrap-up. So every morning, we'll all post in the digital stand-up channel on Slack. You know, you can see Sean there. So today is about getting ready for my contact center webinar. And the good thing here is that you can balance that human aspect with that task aspect. So people are talking about the work, but they're also talking about how they feel. And you can see there, Eduardo shared a really beautiful quote there about the man in the arena. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but essentially we've got a lot of things that are requiring us to do a bit of emotional labor and get out of our comfort zones, similar to these webinars. So that's a really good example of all you need to do is create a Slack channel and create a daily stand-up, daily wrap-up, get people to post what they're doing for the day, and then wrapping up. So that's a really good one to take away. And there are some good examples of formal connections. Now onto the more fun stuff. We've got informal connections. So we mentioned before a water cooler channel. This again could be a channel in Slack or Microsoft Teams where people can just talk about whatever they'd like. If you normally have a coffee in the morning, set up a coffee catch up, jump on Zoom, have a coffee with each other, have a chat. Hopefully you can save your virtual happy hour for a bit later in the day. Eduardo mentioned the generational gap at the start of this. One thing is the meme of the day. So that's a young person's game, I think, sharing memes with each other. But Richard, you also had an example of the daily song challenge.
Yes, we had with some friends of mine, when we started to realise we were going into lockdown, we started a 7-day song challenge. So each member of this group I'm in has 7 days where they have to post a song that reminds them about each other member in the group. And then that just rotates around. So over the course of next month, I'm probably going to find a bunch of stuff about myself that I didn't know based on what songs I remind people of.
And then we've got the thank you channel, or this could even be a gratitude channel. For example, the other day when this crisis was kind of, getting a bit stressful for everyone, we had someone post in the group, let's all just write down 2 things that are positive that we can take away from this. So we had people saying they could spend more time with their kids, more time reading books, thanking each other for the hard work that's going on. But the key point here is to just get creative. Anything that you normally do as a team that's a bit of fun, maybe you got a bit of office banter, open a banter channel, have a chat with each other, keep that humour alive and those opportunities for social conversations. The danger is that we lose those as we go into a remote context, because if we don't recreate them intentionally, they will fall away. We're going to move into emotional connection, which is kind of our last point. So our first point was on virtual working relationships. Let's reach out, get those going. Social connections, there was a few examples there. Hopefully you can take some away. And then Richard is going to guide us through emotional connection and some tools that we can take away with us to use.
Yeah, so in the last probably 5 minutes of this call, I'm just going to talk a bit about emotional connection. So the first thing I want to say is that social distancing doesn't mean social isolation. It actually means relational connection. And we really need to focus on making sure we stay connected when we're socially distant from each other. And one of the first things we can do when we start working virtually is ask our other teammates what their work from home arrangement is. So, for example, some of us might be now working at home and we also live alone. Whereas others are working from home and will now have kids at home. So understanding some of those things helps us to know what are some of the constraints people might have, and also how much social connection we might need to provide each other. So we need to remember that for some people in our team, you may be their only contact or their best contact for the day. So in this slide here, I want to start with, if we don't be emotionally well or positive ourselves, it's really hard to connect with somebody else. So our first tip here, connecting emotionally, it actually starts with you. And we're going to offer some things in here. And I know Cassandra spoke a bit about this yesterday, so we'll keep this brief. But basically, we need to be really proactive in monitoring our own emotions during the day. Just asking ourselves periodically, how am I feeling? Even setting up a meeting reminder in your calendar that prompts you to think about yourself. Now, how am I going? Am I feeling good? Am I feeling down? Am I feeling bored, flat, excited, connected, whatever that might be? And establishing a set of strategies that you can use in order to help bolster your mood, turn your frown upside down. And those strategies fall into one of 4 buckets. 1, thinking strategies, which are all about things like practicing mindfulness or meditation, establishing short-term goals for the day or the week so that you can keep motivated, activating both your creative and rational minds. Physiological strategies, things like exercising or going for a walk, having a regular stretching routine through the day so that you don't get stuck at a desk and where when we're at home we might not get up as much. Breathing regulation, getting the right amount of sleep. What we do know is people in jail who are actually incarcerated, they tend to sleep a lot more than the average person. And that can also lead to some feelings of anxiety or depression. So regulating your sleeping so you're getting just the right amount, not too much and not too little. Eating the right amount of foods with not too much sugar. Relational strategies, things like talking to a friend, reaching out to a team member, joining other social groups across your organization. Establishing a regular routine or workflow, changing your workflow. Sometimes Slack can be annoying, so turn it off for every now and again. Changing your work location around home, making sure you're not working at the same place the whole time. Renegotiating deadlines or deliverables to make sure that you have time to manage everything. the key thing here is looking at that list is to try and identify one thing in each of these buckets so you have a more integrated approach. So you can see here for me, I have a meditation practice. I try to get out for a walk every day with Glenn and my wife. I reach out to team members. I'm changing my workflow to give myself some space to do some deep thinking. And the key thing here is if I take my strategies is to put them in place using the 3 C's. Control. I can do each of these strategies anytime. I'm not reliant upon someone else to do them other than reaching out to team members. They're challenging for me. I really have to stretch myself in order to make them happen. And I can commit to them for the longer term so that I can get the most out of them. Finally, just to say that once we connect with ourselves, in supporting others, it also starts with you. And there's a couple of things here that we want to highlight. The Are You OK campaign where we ask each other once a year on that special day, how are you feeling? And we really proactively think about asking how people are feeling. We can take that into all of our interactions. You notice Joe and I ask each other how we're feeling at the start of this call. The flip side of that is the I'm okay process, where we actually tell each other how we're feeling. We might do an emoji check-in where each morning we put in to a Slack channel, this is the emoji of how I'm feeling. Key is put relationship before task. Before you get into the work itself, make sure you check in on how people are going. And also encourage other people to stay positive. You know, if we know in our team someone's feeling flat, give them one of the strategies I mentioned on the previous slide, and see how they might apply it in their daily work.
Nice. Thank you, Richard. And yeah, the key tip that I wanted to just focus on to close this out is for us to remember that work is more about just doing work. So as we talk about that balance between, yes, we need to translate all of the work we're delivering to a remote context, can be very stressful. There's a lot of things going on, but please remember that you are working with human beings and we all have feelings and we all have emotions. So let's try to not pretend that we don't and bring those to the conversations in balance, of course, and make sure that we are checking in on each other. So that covers our 3 key points. And I wanted to just go through some key things to remember and take away in our last couple of minutes. So that point that Richard mentioned, that social distancing does not mean social isolation. So even though we are confined to our houses, here we are all on a webinar chatting to each other. The tools and technology is available. We've talked about a few really good ones to use. So please jump on those and connect with each other. Remember to prioritize face-to-face communication and phone calls over email and text. As we mentioned, Slack and email, all of those things can start to build up and actually cause a lot more stress. So pick up the phone, have a chat to someone, jump on Zoom, jump on Skype, get as much FaceTime as possible. When we talked about social connection, those informal conversations are super important. So the structured formal ones are important and making sure you're checking in, but those informal ones where people can use a bit of a humor to release some of the tension and the stress, share families with your photos. Those are those connections that we don't want to lose. And the way that you can prioritize and signal as a leader or someone managing a team that you care about the social connection is by scheduling it and putting it in the calendar and showing up. Make the extra effort to check in with one another. And then Richard's given us those 4 strategies for emotional well-being. So use those for yourself, use those for other people in the team. And please, the last thing we want is to just give you a bunch of information and then you jump off this webinar and do nothing about it. So even if you can just do one thing, set up a Slack channel, call someone, whatever that is, please make sure that you do. And that about wraps us up, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Rich and Joe. That was awesome. We've had some really great comments and some ideas come through the chat as well. So a few ideas like show and tell, grab something from home and show it off with your team. So thanks, Tim, for that idea. I know that we are at time, but we did have one question that I'm hoping people can stay and fit in if you have time to answer it, is how do we scale this? We've got a big team across different locations nationally. How do we do this with a really big team?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that we can see social connection pods within teams. So if we set up, for example, 5 or 6 people that we know are going to have that be socially connected, we do that first and make sure one of those people is connected into another team. So if you've got a large team, make it small and then scale it that way. So we don't have to connect with everybody. We just have to have meaningful connections with a small number of people, and those small number of people have connection with other small numbers of people. So we don't have to do it in one hit, just do it in small bites.
Thanks, Rich. Hopefully that answers your question, Vicky, but please do reach out if you have any more questions. You can see our contact details up here, our website, phone number. Please reach out if you have anything else that you'd like to chat with us about. But that's the end of today, and our last one tomorrow will be Eduardo talking about leading virtually. So please join us again tomorrow morning, and we will see you there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.